Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dorothea Lance, and I'm the Community Engagement Specialist with PWSA USA. We are here today with Dr. Forrester. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Oh, you know what? I see what I just did here. Sorry, folks, I had the volume on two different screens at the same time. So we're here today with Dr. Forrester, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist with a specialty in developmental neuropsychiatry. She serves on the Clinical Advisory Board of PWSA USA and the Clinical and Scientific Advisory Board of IPSO. She has had a considerable experience managing the most severe medical and psychiatric and behavioral manifestations of PWS. Through her work with IPSO, she's acquired a world view of PWS management. And I will turn it over to Dr. Forrester.
Thank you so much, Dorothea. I'm pleased to talk about the environment and how we can use it to manage behavior in Prader-Willi syndrome. And so now my screen won't advance. Okay, let me try again. Okay, help. My screen is not advancing.
Is that the first slide?
Yes.
Kamal?
There we go. I have one disclosure. Our learning objectives today are to understand the concept of environment unique to Prader-Willi syndrome, to demonstrate how the brain processes and responds to the environment, both inside and out, and how this shapes our ability to provide an optimal, individualized environment for the person with Prader-Willi syndrome. I'm going to define what an eco-environmental management plan is for PWS, and hopefully at the end, we will appreciate the train as a model for eco-environmental intervention. Just as a reminder, in all of us, the blue genes provide the blueprints to enable the brain to adapt to the body's environment inside and out. And these are missing or not expressed in PWS. So how do we define the environment? Well, there's our little person. And then there's the interpersonal context, the person and the caregiver. And then there's the place where the person resides, either at home or in a residential setting. And then there's school or work, depending upon the person's age. And then there's the greater community in the outlying region. And then just to go more small, we go to the internal environment of the person. So all of these are environmental descriptions that we deal with every day. So how do we define environment in the days of COVID? As you can see, everything shrank down. And this, as we've already heard in previous lectures, in some cases, both internationally and nationally, this was an advantage to the individual because there were far fewer transitions across the day, and some people did extremely well, and other people did less well, and it depended on the individual. So a typical person adapts by integrating signals from sources that are internal inside the body and external from the environment. But we know that everyone is different. And so what we're trying to do is to move toward a truly individualized, optimal, personalized environment inside and out. So the GI tract, nowhere else in the body is the concept of inside and outside more pertinent than in this organ. There are more serotonin receptors in the GI tract than in the brain. And for this region, we often call the gut the second brain. And no wonder, we always refer to it as the organ of intuition, about expressions such as I'm having a gut feeling, or I can't stomach this, or I'm having a nervous stomach like now. Although we perceive these sensations, it's really important to know that the person with PWS does not. And if so, they are significantly diminished. So this mechanism for achieving a balance of perception inside and outside the body is actually automatic. And it's done by a special part of the nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. This is a largely unconscious communication system which joins the brain and the spinal cord that regulates body functions such as heart rate, respiratory rate, digestion, pupillary response, dilatation, constriction, urination, and sexual arousal. And the vagus nerve is the conduit for this communication system from the body to the brain and back again. The hypothalamus is the relay center for the autonomic nervous system. And not to be a spoiler, we know that the hypothalamus does not work properly in Prader-Willi syndrome. So this is the pair of vagal nerves. 20% of the vagus nerve fibers send instructions from the brain to the stomach and body. And these signals control secretion of gastric acid, digestive enzymes. It determines gastric capacity. It determines blood glucose, respiratory rhythm, and heart rate. And then 80% of the vagus fibers send instructions from the stomach to the brain. And these signals control satiety, satiation, and energy metabolism. And what we know is that this part of the system is broken in Prader-Willi syndrome. So what is tried to be accomplished is we try to have a balance in the autonomic nervous system. And like I said, this is typically unconscious. It's done automatically. And it's done through a pair of subsections of the ANS. First section is sympathetic, and the second section is parasympathetic. And together, these two allow the body to maintain homeostasis really minute to minute. So the autonomic nervous system, as we said, is composed of the sympathetic, which is transmitted through the right vagus, and parasympathetic, which is transmitted through the left vagus. The right vagus allows us to respond to the external sensory environment, and it engages us with the environment. It's responsible for energy expenditure, arousal, anticipation, emotional intensification, and also reactivity. It is mediated by neurochemicals that are designed to increase our arousal and increase our stress tolerance. It involves implicit memories, which are sort of the ones that are from our own perception, and decreased explicit memories, which are learned information. And the other thing that's important about the sympathetic side is that effects resolve gradually. The parasympathetic on the left side responds to the internal sensory environment. It disengages us from the environment. It is responsible for energy conservation. It modulates relaxation and contentment. It's mediated by acetylcholine. It increases heart rate variability, which is a good thing for our health. And our mental health as well. And it results in positive feelings and experiences, usually resulting in mood elevation. Unfortunately, effects resolve quickly. So Dr. Stephen Porges, who lectured at the PWSA several years ago, brought us his perception of the polyvagal theory, which talks about these two very important parts of the autonomic nervous system and their function. So there are many causes of autonomic nervous system dysfunction. One is stress, and Dr. Porges has talked a lot about post-traumatic stress and how this causes difficulties in the balance in the ANS. Psychiatric disorders also cause an imbalance. Psychotropic medications also cause problems. And of course, we know that this system is broken in Prader-Willi syndrome. So what we see is with an activation of the sympathetic nervous system with stress, we enter into a fight, flight, or freeze mode. So we're working on something in the moment, which will keep us from being eaten by a bear. So this this slide looks at the anatomy of a tantrum. So I would like for you to look at the slope of these various components 1 through 5. So 1 is the escalation phase of the tantrum. Stress is increasing, but interventions applied at this particular point in time may change and de-escalate the event. However, once we get to 2, look at the slope. This is change that is moving very, very quickly over time. And this is characteristic of Prader-Willi syndrome. These stress effects are causing a massive change in the brain and behavior, and the person is no longer responsive to verbal or physical redirection. And then we look at 3, which is the tantrum or shutdown itself. And this is a massive discharge. But the good thing is that it's always time limited. It may last differently from person to person, but it always goes away. And what happens is that there's a reconsolidation phase where the slope is much more gradual because it takes longer for the sympathetic nervous system to calm down, but eventually it does. And this is the recovery phase. Down here at 5 with the return to baseline. But unfortunately, this recovery phase doesn't last long. It's always this cycle of stress increase over time until we run into this explosion with temper tantrum or shutdown. And for this reason, Dr. Porges thought that this tantrum serves as a reset switch in Prader-Willi syndrome. And then when the tantrum is over, they return to baseline. So we achieve contentment through activating the parasympathetic nervous system in most all of us, but not in Prader-Willi syndrome because this part of the equation has decreased input to the brain. Now, Dr. Tony Holland performed a study where he implanted a vagal nerve stimulator in the left vagus in order to increase input to the brain in the hope that it would cause a decrease in hyperphagia. It wasn't successful with the hyperphagia, but over a series of months, what he observed was that patients exhibited fewer temper tantrums and their overall level of contentment and well-being improved, which had a dramatic impact on their level of function. So it increased their adaptability. So maintaining this balance in the autonomic nervous system is difficult for all of us, but we manage it, and we manage it extremely well during COVID for most of us. So we have to minimize sympathetic input, which is to establish predictability and consistency. By the way, these are the things that all the psychological and psychiatric associations were telling us to tell our patients. Have a schedule, be predictable, be consistent. Limit change, order your activities across the day, alternate between preferred and non-preferred. Limit task novelty and complexity, limit task switching and the number of transitions. Manage your choices effectively, modulate sensory cues in the environment, and rely on ambience such as lighting, color of the room, background noise, etc. And if you're in a situation where you have a caretaker, make sure that that level of voice tone and volume is modulated. And of course, limit idiosyncratic triggers. And then at the same time, we're maximizing parasympathetic input, which is structure, schedule, and also mindfulness activities involving deep breathing and rhythmic breathing, and also exercise with stretching especially. That's why yoga is so effective. And then balanced opportunities for work and other activities. So often we were glued to our screens for visual format, and we really didn't take adequate breaks in the day. We had to allow for time for leisure, preferred activities, and things that were repetitive. You know, and unfortunately, if you think about it, people gained weight during COVID, and that's part of that repetitive behavior. That hand-to-mouth behavior is very, unfortunately, reassuring. So you provide sensory stimulation and modulation for yourself across all of these different modalities. I'll get back to those. So if you look at behaviors that increase parasympathetic activity, eating, particularly snacking, repetitive motor movements that are automatic and self-soothing, repetitive actions, sensory seeking behaviors, preferred pleasurable activities, resting, sleeping, needing to know with repetitive asking, and resisting change. What does this sound like to you? Well, it should sound like the Prader-Willi syndrome behavioral phenotype. And in fact, that may be what we're seeing. Could the person with Prader-Willi syndrome be using these phenotypic behaviors to compensate for their genetically determined brain and body differences? So many of the behaviors associated with the PWS phenotype result from the person's attempt to cope with this autonomic nervous system imbalance. And they are attempting to increase their parasympathetic tone. And even the hyperphagia itself may be a part of this. So just food for thought. So stress is everywhere for our folks with PWS. And unfortunately, they are so stress sensitive from the get-go of their life. And so what we can do is provide an environmental buffer, which can work very effectively to decrease the level of stress. Unfortunately, this buffer requires a high degree of infrastructure, but once you expend the energy to do it, it really pays off. So the environmental buffer includes controlled food access, calorie management, psychological food security, which is different from controlled food access, a daily plan, mandatory exercise, and I would say mandatory sensory motor stimulation, and also a style of communication that is conducive to increasing parasympathetic tone. We have to provide appropriate expectations, a sense of predictability, consistency, non-contingent reinforcement, and contingent reinforcement. I know our ABA colleagues will know what this is, and I will define these a little bit later, and behavioral supports. So here's the person and the caregiver. And what we are striving to achieve is a goodness of fit. And what we're trying to do is to buffer this interaction effectively through this environmental holding aspect. And this is called an eco-environmental intervention. It is how we craft the environment to improve the interaction between the person and their caregiver. So eco-environmental interventions in PWS involve this tool to reduce syndrome-specific characteristics by managing the interaction between the person and the environment, and that's the train. The train is a tool for reducing anxiety, insecurity, and non-compliance. It minimizes stress by managing transitions to achieve a sense of flow through the day. Flow is a sense of psychological well-being. It provides predictability, it minimizes uncertainty, and it provides continuous feedback to the person. It achieves a balance of tasks and activities. It builds self-esteem through mastery, and it sets and reinforces Zeitgebers. So Zeitgebers are those anchors in the day that help reinforce circadian rhythms, such as exposure to light, temperature, exercise, eating, and social interaction. These are essential for maintaining normal mood, and we use the train to establish Zeitgebers as a routine part of the train. And this is the most important part, which is the daily schedule. Each train has an engineer, and we'll talk about the fact that you can have multiple trains across a day, but the engineer decides the order of the sequence of activities in the day. That way, breaks in the schedule will happen, but the engineer can see what lies ahead and can always make allowances for those. The engineer drives the train. They anticipate changes in the schedule, announcing that a change will occur in advance. They manage expectations. They implement contingencies. They offer cues when a change is about to occur. And also another helpful visual is a flexibility card that the caregiver can present when a change is about to occur. And in fact, you can actually use the flexibility card to put a list of coping strategies on the back so that the person knows what they can do to try to settle their stress because they're anticipating some change. The engineer always reassures that mealtime will occur within the order of the new schedule. So flow, this psychological well-being, is achieved by managing a smooth transition between scheduled activities. And then by doing this, you schedule preferred activities after less preferred tasks. So it's like, it's like electricity. So what you're doing is you're having preferred, non-preferred, preferred, non-preferred. So the preferred activities always carry you through the non-preferred elements. Smooth transitions are essential. And the train helps do this because all activities are time limited. You can use a time timer to help the person manage time passing, or you can use verbal cues to indicate the time remaining. You use visual cues, like the train itself, to transition to the next activity. Most activities will occur at least twice a day, so you can always reassure the person that they will have another opportunity to complete a task, as many of our individuals like to complete a task before they move on. So every now and then you can load an empty train car that the person can use for a self-directed activity. And by the way, the person always has input into the activities in the train, but it's the engineer who makes the cue. So these are the train components. There are 5. And the first is the visualized daily schedule. So it is a linear sequence of events. This is really important for executive function. It focuses our attention. It increases working memory. It improves decision-making because it takes away a lot of extraneous possibilities, and it alternates preferred and non-preferred. On the train, a person doesn't have to worry what will happen next. They can use their brain for other things. This is really important. And this is loading the train. So we're creating a linear track from the morning awakening to bedtime. And as you can see, we've already put the caboose at bedtime. The second is food security. I know Dr. Garash is going to be talking a lot about food security, but food is an ever-present sense of stress for our individuals, and stress results in behavior problems, irritability, arguing, tantrums, aggression, self-injury, all manifestations of that sympathetic nervous system. So this is what it looks like in real time. So you see down in the bottom, we see with time, we have expectation, an event, and a response. So if the person has an expectation that a particular event will occur and it occurs as expected, there's no tantrum. However, if a person doesn't have an expectation, or they have an expectation and the event is discrepant from what has been predicted, therefore a disappointment, then what happens is that there is a response, and that response is your typical tantrum or shutdown. So what it looks like in terms of the brain is that there's an expectation that is based on experience. This is a learning paradigm. Then there's a cognitive disappointment when something anticipated doesn't occur, and the person does not have the skills to be able to modify their expectations. And that's typical for Prader-Willi syndrome, cognitive rigidity. And then there's an emotional response, which is confusion, anxiety, it can be frustration. It can be a sense of hurt or loss or anger at the person. And this, again, further increases stress. And then the impulsivity that is ever present in PWS because of their deficits in inhibition, they lose their impulse control and they have the tantrum or the shutdown. So we can look at it as a tantrum as a phenomenon associated with disappointment. So for PWS, we ever have to manage expectations. But managing expectations is just not about the food. It applies to the daily schedule, parent schedules, any appointments outside the home, visits to relatives, etc. They have a need to know. And it also applies to everything that is rewarding to the person. It applies to anything that they find salient in their lives. And this is also because they don't know when enough is enough. So that satiety deficit that happens with food translates easily into everything that they find rewarding. And so this is our logo for food security: no doubt, no hope, or no opportunity, and no disappointment. But we can easily extend this to everything security. And this is one of the things that the train does very effectively. So the second component here is we're going to load the meals and the snacks onto the queue. And as you can see, in this case, we have breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, and a snack before bedtime. So the third is supervised daily exercise. Exercise is essential. It is for PWS. It's essential for maintaining weight regulation, but it's also essential for stress management. It is movement with purpose. It is 30 minutes twice daily for weight maintenance, and it is 1 hour twice daily for weight loss. It should always be let's exercise, not go exercise. Walking is the best exercise. And when you walk with your person with Prader-Willi syndrome, you can find out a lot of information about what's going on in their life. And not only is the walking good for them, but the walking is really good for you as well. And they can be competitive. They can be competitive with you. They can be competitive with themselves. You can time the amount of time that it takes them to go a specific distance, and they will want to beat their time. So exercise maintains muscle tone, promotes healthy utilization of insulin. We've talked a lot about insulin in this meeting. It improves weight bearing, which combats osteoporosis. It provides sensory motor experience, which is essential. It helps to regulate sleep-wake cycle. It helps breathing, ventilatory volume, which we know is compromised in PWS, and it reduces stress. Always schedule exercise before a preferred activity, because our guys in their parasympathetic attempt to increase that tone, they're going to want to relax. And we need to motivate them to exercise by putting it before a preferred activity, like a meal. Now, I do want to mention that there's one circumstance where you want to put exercise after, and that is if the person has reflux or rumination, because exercise actually promotes gastric emptying and GI transit. And so you would want to schedule exercise after the meal. So here we are putting exercise on the track. In this particular case, we again put it before a meal, and we did it for 1 hour per day, divided over 2 sessions. So the third is the balanced variety of activities. I think our guys left to their own would just do the same thing over and over and over again. Number one, because they don't have a sense of satiety. They don't know when enough is enough. And also because they derive a lot of satisfaction from doing that. But that's not conducive to good, healthy daily management of yourself. And it doesn't teach you new skills. So we want to mix up novel and practiced skills. We want to mix preferred and non-preferred. We want to mix active and passive. We want to look at this both as for schoolwork and leisure. And sensory motor, if I was going to redo the train, I would add a domain that is specifically for sensory motor, because it's so important to increasing parasympathetic tone. And then, of course, rest. Our guys love rest. Many of our folks take naps, but Dr. Glaze said for someone over age 6, no naps should be needed. And what I see, even for older kids, they're trying to sneak in a 20 to 30 minute nap. And my parents will tell me that they really feel that it is a refreshing experience for them during the day. And we all know that those cat naps help blow off that accumulating REM sleep, which intrudes into our daytime wakefulness and contributes to our excessive daytime sleepiness. So here we are to sensory motor interventions. Always kudos to Janice Agarwal, who has taught me so much of the importance of a sensory diet. This is usually prescribed by an occupational therapist in the school setting or during an outpatient visit. It can be an individualized intervention for the person, but it can also be a group intervention, which helps with skill maintenance and also improves social experience. And we know from our colleagues in Europe that actually watching other people participating in a physical exercise or sensory motor exercise actually improves the compliance of the person with those skills. But as with everything, you should start low and go slow. And these activities, and I asked the question yesterday, how frequently should sensory motor be done through the day? And I think it should be done as often as it can be, really. So items on a diet can be visual. You can use filtered light with filters, colored filters, which will change the wavelength of light that the person sees. Colors in rooms on walls are very important. Cool colors are relaxing. Big, bright colors tend to increase anxiety or increase arousal, which may not be desired. Sunglasses are needed because our guys are very sensitive to sunlight. Sound is important. They love music. They love rhythm. They love dancing. They like whispers. Some of them may talk too loud, but if you whisper, they will definitely move closer and try to understand what you're saying. They love singing. They love karaoke. They are not good at having a sense of pitch. I think in all of my years, I have seen two people who can really carry a tune, but they love to belt out a song. And in one individual who I was trying to teach breathing exercises to, he enjoyed singing. And what we did was we practiced between he and his mom a competition between who could hang on to the note the longest, which is great for improving diaphragmatic breathing and decreasing stress. Aromas are very important. And Janice talked about tastes, using those sprays that are bursts of fruit activity and hot sauce that really sends an alerting response. And that's true about chewing gum as well. So you can get chewing gum that is in really hot, like cinnamon or these bold fruit flavors, and that both the chewing and also the taste really improves alertness. Using crunchies is also textures is important. Textures is also for tactile. So I had an individual who tended to do some skin picking in the classroom, and what we provided on his desk, we provided Velcro, and the Velcro has a rough feeling to it, and so we used the Velcro to try to help him not pick and use the Velcro instead. Touch. Tickles can be infectious. Laughter is probably one of the best things we can do to help increase parasympathetic tone. Drumming, both body drumming and African drumming, both very important, gives a lot of stimulation to the palms of the hand. Popping bubble pack, brushing, and pressure sensation. A lot of our guys can benefit from spandex, which gives a lot of pressure sensation to the whole body skin, but they also like squeezing, to actually give them a really, really big bear hug is very important. And also to put them through between two yoga mats and sort of gently press down. They love that. Deep massage, very important. Vestibular, spinning, rocking, bouncing, all of these are very important. Swimming, cycling, throwing objects. I'd rather them do it in a controlled way rather than in a tantrum. Having a bean bag throwing contest. Anything that will get their arms up over their head, like with volleyball, badminton, or just using a large cage ball, having multiple people work together to keep it above their arms, it increases lung capacity. And it also increases tone around the shoulder. And as you know, our guys tend to be much more slumped over. And then walking is really the best exercise ever. So sensory motor interventions decrease anxiety, they increase alertness and attention, they improve perception, multisensory processing, and motor outflow. They diminish skin picking and stereotypic behaviors, those little habits that our guys are really good at doing. And they increase parasympathetic tone. So this is another cartoon that looks at what happens if you have an antecedent event where there's something that's unexpected, like a demand, and the person has a response to that, which is a non-constructive response. And this is what happens when you do a sensory motor intervention before the target event. It increases the brain's threshold to be able to tolerate uncertainty, to be able to tolerate a demand. It increases their focus. And so Then what happens is that you do sensory preparation and there is no an event that occurs, no tantrum, no shutdown. So I can't speak highly enough of the impact of sensory motor intervention in our day. So these are the opportunities for grooming, which is another activity that usually requires a lot of hand over hand or prompting for our individuals. Work and leisure and sensory motor activities onto the track. So this is what a completed train looks like. So the last part of the train is behavioral expectations and response. And so I know we've talked a lot about ABA this meeting, which is great. It's really important to establish expectations for our individuals. We should establish rules. We should write them down and display them. We should phrase them positively as measurable behaviors. Respect personal boundaries or observe your personal space. Use polite language, be a good listener, be a helpful citizen. Everyone has rules, but not everyone's rules are the same. And this is important for people to know when you have siblings of individuals with PWS who are constantly questioning, why does my brother, why does my sister get away with things? So this is what I promised. Non-contingent reinforcement is the delivery of response independent of an individual's behavior. So it's a useful tool for developing rapport and maintaining appropriate behavior. Now, I do want to just tell you a little aside. When you look at studies that are behavioral studies that look at the impact of interventions for improving self-injurious behavior, it's not unusual for non-contingent reinforcement to be the placebo or the alternative trial for the intervention. And what's amazing is when you look at these studies, there's always an improvement just with the non-contingent reinforcement. And we know individuals who have really severe self-injurious behavior like Leishmanian. If you are in proximity to the person and you continue with a lot of non-contingent reinforcement, their rate of self-injury decreases. So this is an extremely important tool, even though we don't really think of it as part of behavioral intervention. So non-contingent can be scheduled feedback, it can be charting weights or exercise time, it can be using regularly scheduled reviews of progress toward goals, or it can be spontaneous feedback to the person. Hey, you're having a great day. I can tell you care about the way you look. I can see you are having a hard time. So contingent reinforcement is the delivery of a response dependent on an individual's behavior. And this is what we're most familiar with in an ABA kind of format. This is a useful tool for increasing the frequency of desirable behaviors. So contingent responses can be verbal praise, a displayed list of rewards and their frequency, can involve tangibles like stars, stickers, tokens, tickets. It can be privileges or it can be special activities with others. I like this because it can be an activity that the person with Prader-Willi syndrome can select, and then the whole family does that activity. The number one PWS behavioral tool really is low expressed emotion. This is so important because our guides will key on whatever it is that we're sending in our tone of voice, and they will react to that because they're not great at multi-sensory processing. So they will take one aspect of your communication and run with it. And we really want them to be able to listen and hear what it is that you have to say. So you should always use neutral affect, calm voice, be firm but not stern. You should avoid eye contact because eye contact actually activates a part of the brain which is responsible for that increased stress and freeze, flight, fright kind of response. And instruct rather than scold. There really is no basis for scolding. So be interested, be upbeat, even though you may be coming off a tantrum with the individual and that person's just like nothing has happened and you're full of grudge and angry at them. You have to put that aside and you have to be positive and not punitive. You have to be accepting and not critical. You have to be forgiving and not grudge holding. You have to be patient, proactive, not reactive, and firm but not stern. And I think Clint did such a wonderful job of describing that in his interaction with Maddie. So the caregiver response should always be proactive, not reactive. That's the value of the train. The engineer always knows what's going to happen. Selectively attend to appropriate behavior, redirect and distract. Clarify expectations, describe the behavior that is expected. Don't leave it up to guess what I'm thinking. Communicate calmly and effectively. Use the least number of words. Convey one request at a time. Use the language choice to reflect the order of action. So when you finish putting the toys away, we will move to the lunch table. Allow time for processing delay. A lot of our guys are very slow processors. And I think a lot of times this is misinterpreted as oppositional behavior by teachers. And what you need to do is just give them time to process the demand that has been made of them. And not only do they have difficulty processing the demand, but they have difficulty engineering in their brain what the response is going to be. So that mechanism does not flow fluidly in their brain the way it might for us. So you have to wait patiently. So you always can say to the person, and I already mentioned this, I see that you're having a hard time. That lets them know that you are in the same place as they are at this time. And what we really want is we want everything to be Team PWS. We are all in it for the success of the person. So tell the person, we'd like to see you get back on the train, to do the next preferred activity that we know you like, and to attain your reward at the end of the day. But never question, tease, taunt, bribe, argue, threaten, force, criticize, or take away privileges spontaneously, because this type of coercion actually increases escape avoidance behavior and retaliation. And if they learn this once, they will continue to try to do it forever. And so we do not want to get bad habits started. So operating the train, the order of activities in the day is the most important, not the actual time of day. A lot of our guys will have reactive perseveration on time of day, and they'll hold you to it. Well, it's 1:10. We need to move on to the next activity. No, we move on to the next activity when the order dictates it and when the activity is done to the engineer's satisfaction. Preferred rewarding activities follow non-preferred. We've mentioned this several times. Exercise, chores, school, and work, these may be non-preferred activities, but always follow these up with preferred. If a person can't make the transition from a given activity repeatedly, we see it as a pattern, add a more rewarding activity to follow it in the queue. If a person is having an exceptionally difficult time, increase the density of preferred activities in the queue. So if somebody's had a huge meltdown, or if they've unfortunately been admitted to the hospital, when they come home, you want to continue a train, but you want to increase it with a lot of preferred activities in the queue. This gets them re-engaged, and then you can begin to add in less preferred activities. And the actual time spent in each activity, again, as I mentioned, is determined by the engineer, not the person. If a tantrum or shutdown occurs during an activity, the progress of the day stops. So what happens is the person gets off the train. The train is not moving. Be present during the tantrum, because you have to manage safety, not only for the person, but also for the environment and for anyone else that is around. Provide low attention and low emotional response during this time, and redirect with support. And I've given you some ideas about things that you can say. When the tantrum resolves, the day resumes exactly where it left off, but the engineer may decrease the time duration of subsequent activities so that they can do a catch-up by the next meal. So how do you keep your train on the track? You review the schedule regularly with your team. So although there's only one engineer, there may be multiple, for a given chunk of time, there may be multiple engineers involved across the day. You could have an engineer at school, you could have an engineer at home for the morning routine, you can have an engineer at home for the afternoon routine, and you can have another engineer for bedtime. You want to check the couplers, make sure that those transitions are occurring smoothly. And if there are bumps in the road, you have to figure out how to make those transitions more smooth. And make sure that you use non-contingent reinforcement as an automatic re-railing process. It works very effectively to maintain flow. Check the brakes. Behavioral contingencies should be in place and rehearsed. Everybody should know what to do if the train stops. Engine tune-ups are required so that everybody knows who is the engineer in a given time period, and use this as an opportunity to educate and inform everyone who is involved in your team. So in summary, the train offers a way to increase the intensity of parasympathetic stimulation necessary to manage the autonomic imbalance in Prader-Willi syndrome. This is something that is broken, and if we don't do it for them, they will figure out a way to do it for themselves. If you think about it, as the stress in their life increases, so do all of the intensity of phenotypic behaviors. The train can be individualized for each person's unique needs. It can be chunked throughout the day, and there can be engineers for each segment. Environmental controls contain the major PWS behaviors emerging from the phenotype. Non-contingent reinforcement keeps the person engaged in the train process and sustains the interpersonal interaction. And contingent reinforcement provides the continuous external feedback or reinforcement to shape and sustain behavior directed toward achieving the common goal, which is healthy living, productive living, positive interpersonal interactions for all. So when you use the train, your behavior problems blow up in smoke. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan, for your presentation. We have a few questions. I first want to start out with some thank yous that people had. Lisa said, Dr. Forrester has devoted her life to helping all of us. We are forever in her debt.
Thank you, Lisa.
And our Kate
right back at you, by the way.
And she also said, Kate has amazing pitch, an outlier for sure, based on our PWS Christmas songs, party singing.
Yes.
All right. So, have you heard of success with Safe and Sound? Person listens to 5 hours of music of various frequencies over a period of 1 to 2 weeks.
There are a variety of listening therapies that are very helpful for people who have difficulties with auditory perception. So I personally know of a non-PWS person who has benefited incredibly well with improvement in executive function. So I believe that there is definitely a benefit for these. I have not seen them used specifically in Prader-Willi syndrome. I would worry about the time duration that would require, because I think our guys would have difficulty attending to that degree of time, 5 hours a day across, even though it's a short-lived intervention.
All right, thank you. Another question had asked have you heard that light hitting the retina increases dopamine? So I tried walking 10 minutes first thing. Is this true?
You know, I'm sorry. I learn something new every day. I'd have to go back to the literature to take a look at this to see, in fact, if light hitting the retina does improve dopamine. But I can tell you that the frequency of light that hits your retina definitely has an impact on your well-being. And that there are some frequencies that actually increase alertness And there are some frequencies that decrease intervention that really produce sort of a noxious kind of response and make you very tired. So definitely the frequency of light does have an impact, and there is a retinal hypothalamic pathway that is ripe for study at some point.
Thank you. In regards to naps, if we know a teenager with PWS has narcolepsy, do you still recommend limiting naps? We also know that fatigue is a main setting event for problem behavior. School limits to 30 minutes, but he often takes 2.
Okay, so, I have to go back to what Dr. Glaze said. He does not see a role for napping at all during the day. I think that that napping, again, it's one of those characteristics that will help to increase parasympathetic tone. But I think that there are other things that we can be doing to help that. I do know that when people are drowsy, there is an increased likelihood that they might have a behavioral episode. And I do hear this from parents that some people do require their naps. And that their day does not go well if they don't have it. But I would like to structure the day better so that we're doing some other kinds of activities to increase parasympathetic tone so that they don't have to take a nap, even the ones who have narcolepsy.
All right. And a question came up is, will these slides be made available to us?
Absolutely. In fact, there is a monograph that you can download that talks about how to make your own train. And it's available on the website or hub.
So the slides will be on the hub. There does not appear to be any other questions, Dr. Forrester. So if there's anything, I will kind of keep an eye if anybody else has any questions, because we have a few minutes left of her time, but nothing has come through. The hub will have the slides, and the recording of this video will be made available in the next week or so on the PWSA USA website. We ask that our participants complete the survey that is on the side of your screen, because that allows us to identify improvements for convention. Your feedback is very valuable, so we appreciate if you would take the time to complete this survey. And at this time, Dr. Forrester, no other questions have come in.
Okay, thank you very much for your attention. And Marguerite, thank you so much for moderating this. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.